Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with some of the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we learn what dyslexic thinking is and how we can employ it to change the world. This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Their free tool, Immersive Reader, helps every dyslexic with reading and comprehension. Find out more by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. I'm joined by one of New York's finest chefs and top TV personality, Marc Murphy. Marc, you've cooked in the world's best kitchens from Paris to Monte Carlo. You've shared your passion for food as a judge on TV show Chopped, and you've said we dyslexics think very differently to most people. I love that. I totally agree with you. How do you think differently?
I mean, for me, thinking differently is just, it's sort of strange because I know I do, but I don't realize that I do until maybe sometimes afterwards, where I am with other people or we're working on something and I see the problem being not a problem and some people seeing it as a problem, and it's just fix it. And it just seems so simple to me sometimes. And sometimes people look at you and go, wow, I would have never thought of it that way. And I don't realize it until somebody else realizes it. And it's kind of fun. It's like, it's not like I go into a situation and go, I'm dyslexic, I'm gonna take care of this. I go in and just do what I do. And the next thing I know, it's like, oh, this is understandable. I had a funny moment with my son recently. I forgot we were doing something and I went some way to do something and he goes, wow, Dad, I would have never thought of that. And I realized, oh, that's probably because I'm dyslexic.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think we spend so much time at school being criticised for not being good at stuff that we don't realise that we are actually really, really good at stuff. And when we leave school, that's when we really lean into them. So loads of celebrity chefs are dyslexic. Jamie Oliver, Marco Pierre White, so many of them. What do you think it is about dyslexic thinking that makes so many great chefs?
I mean, if you go back to when I was a line cook, when you're a line cook, you're basically what we call picking up probably 6, 7, maybe 8 different dishes. So you have to be in charge of doing, if you think of each dish maybe needing 3 or 4 things on it, just multiply that. And you have to be able to sort of be in control of all that. On top of it, you need to have the timing of knowing when that duck is in the back corner of the oven. That one's the medium rare one, and the one on the left is going to be the well done. You got the filet mignon over here, you've got the potatoes warming up, and everything you do, it's a bit of a dance, and you have to be able to realize that you have to think of all these things. And if you had to think about it as in writing, I don't think you could really do it. But if you think of them as just an inner feeling, which is what I have, I always feel like, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, it'll take a minute to do that, probably like 2 minutes to do this, and then it'll be time to flip the rack of lamb in the back of the oven over here. And then once I'm done with that task, it'll take me, and I'm always thinking ahead. And it's funny because you try to explain that to people, and it's completely mind-boggling to somebody that can't think this way.
So it's like a whole sensing thing and just knowing, getting that real sort of multi-sensory feeling of how something needs to be cooked or prepared, or the timing.
It's also just thinking differently about, and not that I know anything much about science, but thinking differently about viscosities of sauces or something that you're doing, or a braising, or you're doing something and you're like, okay, I could do this, but if I incorporate this, I could thicken it this way. And I think where people get in trouble a lot of the times, at least from what I see with the people that aren't dyslexic, is they just follow a recipe or they follow the rules. Don't follow the recipes, don't follow the rules, follow your heart and follow what you think is right. And that's what's very easy, that comes easy to me. I can't read a recipe. I'm not good at baking because I can't measure things. I'm too impatient. I want to just throw things together because I know what I want to do. And I get in trouble a lot now that there's social media. I work with somebody on social media, and I was making something the other day, and she goes, well, that's great, we could post it, but I need the recipe. I'm like, I have no idea what I did. I mean, it was just, I cooked, I made this thing, and I know it came out really good. It's tricky for me to really put things down in writing in that sense. I'm always making different things. I constantly make different things. I had a friend who, 2 years ago on my birthday, you made me this chicken dish. I'm like, well, I hope you got a picture of it. Maybe I can recreate it, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's fantastic. So do you think it's curiosity, exploring, doing things differently, not following the rules, not following patterns?
Yeah, I think that's probably, not following the rules, not following patterns. I think it opens you up for maybe mistakes that become really good mistakes and mistakes that you learn things from. I think when I was in the restaurant business, every year I would say, we got another PhD this year in running restaurants. And the only way I learned was, metaphorically falling down, skinning your knees, getting back up and doing it again. And that's the way I learn. It's sort of, I realized that right away when I became a line cook, one of my first jobs. I was very quick at learning my mistakes and fixing them very quickly. Well, also, the chef would yell at me, so I would be like, okay, I better figure this out quickly.
Yeah, so that leads very much into failure, doesn't it? Failure is a good thing, isn't it, in most instances?
I think failure is probably the only way I learn. I don't think I'd learn any other way. I mean, textbooks did not do it for me.
So what was school like for you?
I always describe school like a jail sentence. I was just waiting to break out. I had to get out of there. I was just miserable. I was the class clown because I had to get some attention somehow. I was constantly in trouble. I think I spent most of my time in the principal's office. And I was, I'd come home with, 5 Fs and 1 D, and I would tell my parents, I passed 1 class this year. I was excited. They didn't like that.
And did you know you were dyslexic at school, or did you find out later?
No, I didn't find out till much later. And most of my time growing up, I was just considered dumb and always restless and troublemaker. Only did they really realize I was dyslexic till later on, and I went to a program. I think it was in the middle of high school. When I was younger, they really didn't know what dyslexia was. I mean, they sort of knew about it. They had no idea how to deal with it. They didn't know how to diagnose it either, I don't think. So at least where I was living. And I was the son of a diplomat, so we moved every 2 or 3 years. So there was no school that really had me long enough to really figure anything out. They might have if I had been in one spot, but I kept moving around. And the worst part about it for me was when I was very young, we lived in Villefranche in the south of France, and I was going to a French school, a Catholic French school. And I'm left-handed, but they would, hit my hand and make me write with my right hand, which was then later on everybody discovered was much worse for dyslexics because of the right part of your brain and your left part of your body, that whole thing. And then when I moved to another city, then I had to force myself to write with my left hand. So I was, that wasn't fun.
So how did school make you feel? It must have been tough.
The school it was the most disappointing thing. It would be, as I said, it felt like a jail sentence. It was, it's terrible going somewhere for, however many hours you go where everybody's just telling you you're dumb. I mean, it kind of sucks.
How did you deal with that sort of self-doubt? Because a lot of dyslexics we've spoken to still have that self-doubt that's sort of ingrained from your school days. Do you still have that? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
Now, I thought this was just an interview, not a therapy session. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Self-doubt's something that I always have, I think. I think most people have it anyway, but I think, it's probably definitely magnified because as a child, you're constantly told you're not good at anything. And then when you do find out that you're good at something, I get emotional about it. And I get emotional. I have 2 kids, and I get emotional even talking about them and their accomplishments and just seeing something good happening. I never thought it was supposed to happen to me. And you build a lot of defense mechanisms. In school, as I said, I was a class clown. I was constantly in trouble. I would get attention that way. I would find ways to cheat on every exam and every test. I put more effort into that than I did at studying because it was easier for me to, figure out a mechanism to cheat than to actually do the work because I couldn't do it. I had no clue how to do it. Nobody was able to teach me that.
That's problem solving at an early age, just probably not the right sort of problems, but the right ones for you.
I think that being able to think outside the box and figure out another way to get through a situation is an education in itself. And school was constantly that, how to get away with things and how to manipulate people into doing things for you. I remember I was in one school where they had help for kids with learning disabilities. And it was basically, I figured out how to make them do my homework for me. That was charming, let me tell you.
So the people skills, that's another big dyslexic thinking skill, and probably very useful when you're doing the sort of thing you do both with your restaurants and cooking, but also TV presenting as well. That sort of communication thing. Do you find that that's something that you really lean into as a skill?
People ask me, how did you get comfortable on TV? And I think that comes back from maybe being in school and not really caring what people think about you, because you had no control over that. You had no control over what people thought about you. And TV's the same thing. I just do what I do. I am who I am. I eat what I eat on television. I try to describe it verbally to the camera so people can sort of understand what we're eating during a competition, for example, and being able to describe it. I think those are using words to describe things is important. And that I'm good at. And I'm good at sitting there patiently while we wait for the cameras to roll, which is the other part of being on television.
And when did you discover that cooking was your thing?
Cooking, I finally struggled, but I did graduate high school finally after a couple of them asked me to leave. And then I was moved to New York, and I was living on my brother and his girlfriend's couch. And my brother's girlfriend was born and raised in New York City, and she knew all sorts of people, and it was that age where people were getting married and having kids. So I became basically a handyman. I was painting baby rooms and building closets, and I'm very handy. Work with my hands a lot. And I was good at that. And after a while, I thought, I got to stop this. This is really getting boring. And because I was living on the couch for free, I would cook dinner every night for the three of us. And as my brother would say, one week I was interested in making soufflés, so we ate soufflés for a week. Cheese, crab, chocolate. I would make soufflés all the time. And after a while of doing this, he looked at me, and he had heard of this cooking school, and he goes, "Why don't you go become a cook? You seem to love this, and it's good." And I was like, "Is that really a job?" I didn't even understand it to be a job. I was never raised to even think about that being a job. And then so I found a little bit of money that was in a bank for my education. My father had put away for me. So I took that out, and I went to a cooking school for 3 months, and I was like, well, this is fun. It didn't feel like work. It was so funny because there was written tests and there was practical. Of course, the written tests were a disaster, but the practical, my teachers were like, well, you're good at this. You can really grasp at it. And I was lucky enough to have been born in Europe. I was born in Milan, and my mother's French, so we traveled a lot in France. In Italy, that's where I grew up mostly. So I think I was already ahead of the class in a certain sense because I knew flavors. I knew what I liked. I loved eating. I always loved eating as a kid. So I had a leg up, already knew what flavors were supposed to taste like.
If you were able to go back, what do you think that your 7-year-old self would think of what you're doing now and how successful you've become?
I think my 7-year-old self would not believe it at all. No, that would be forget it. I didn't think I would make it this far. I didn't think I would ever amount to anything. When I decided to start cooking, I thought, oh, well, at least if I can eat, I can deal with probably being homeless, but I'm always hungry and I wanted to be able to eat. So I thought if I cook, once I got into that and I liked it, I thought, well, if I'm cooking in a restaurant, at least there'll be food. I don't want to be hungry because I love eating. But yeah, no, my 7-year-old self, forget about it. That's gonna draw up all sorts of emotions.
I know, it's a good question, isn't it? So my last question for you is, if you could give young people today, or dyslexics anywhere, one piece of advice, what would it be?
I mean, I would say that anything to somebody who's dyslexic as a young kid is just grin and bear it right now. You got to get through this system called school, and don't think that that's going to make who you are. Because I know that for other people, I think school is very important. I think for people that have a traditional learning ability, and I don't know what we call those people, but people that are not dyslexics, there's a big value in school. And it's not. I think that especially for the things you're learning, right? So if you're a kid in school, you have to also understand that the curriculum that you're going through is not everything that you're learning. You're also learning how to communicate. You're learning how to deal with people. You're learning how to have patience. You're learning how to go through a system, because you're always going to end up being in some type of a system. You're going to have to understand that. But the actual stuff that you're bad at is probably not what you're going to be doing once you get out of school, because most people graduate school, they'll gravitate towards the things that they're good at. And I think that it's very difficult, because I don't think traditional schools give anybody that's dyslexic any inkling of a glimpse of what they think they're going to end up becoming, because it's just not there. There's no system, there's no schooling that's going to teach that. Because if you're good at math, you know, people, the math teacher are going to go, oh, you can do this job, and this job, and that job. If you're, you know, good at history, oh, you might have this job and this job, right? You might become a philosopher if you're good at all these things. But when you're dyslexic, I think that the sky's the limit, and I think you're in a much better position than the other people.
Fantastic. Totally agree with you. Thank you so much, Mark. That was brilliant. Thank you.
This is great. Great. I came to therapy. This was nice. Thanks.